within the city of Newark to be under the leadership of a mayor that has taken great initiative as it relates to creating comprehensive responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the negative impact that it's had on small businesses, healthcare, and a variety of different areas of our community. And we just want to give the mayor the opportunity to talk about some of the work that he's done, as well as just talk about the importance of the PPP program as it relates to making sure the small businesses act now to apply. Mayor BARAKA.
Thank you, Brunel. I just want to thank, obviously, Invest Newark, Brunel Hall, Combs Enterprises, everybody that was involved in standing this webinar up and this process up as well is incredibly, incredibly important. Given what you've seen in the news about the first round of funding that went out for businesses, obviously that money didn't make it to us. It made it to the Los Angeles Lakers, but it didn't make it to us. So it's important that we, in fact, have folks that'll help us navigate that process in order that we actually get the kind of funding that we need, particularly in cities like Newark. We know on the 24th Congress added an additional money to the Payroll Protection Program, and applications are open yesterday, I believe, and the money will probably run out fairly shortly. It's imperative that MWBEs, who are probably at 10% or less at this point, can get access to this funding, access to this money, particularly in places like Newark, where it took us a long time after the Newark Rebellion in 1967 to recover and actually get businesses back, at least in some modicum shape where they're functioning, particularly Black and brown businesses, and to have that all destroyed in a month or less is tragic, to say the least, and it'll destroy many generations in our community. It's important for us to get a part of this kind of revenue that's coming to these cities and to these states and to these businesses is incredibly important, particularly since small businesses in this country make up most of the jobs, most of the growth, most of the development. So it's important that we, especially in places like Newark. So I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful to all of the presenters, to all of the folks here today that are providing opportunity, a bridge, if you will, to Newark businesses to make sure that they can recover from COVID-19 and be able to continue to build on things they were building on for a very, very long time. We talk about small family businesses, mid-sized businesses, community businesses that are still in the middle of this, helping us feed people, helping us pass things out. When they have nothing, they're still giving. And so they deserve this. So thank you to everybody once again. Thank you, Brunel, Invest Newark, Combs Enterprises, everybody that's involved in this today. And please apologize if I forget to mention you. Charge it to my head and not my heart. There's a lot going on, and we are, in the middle of this battle, and we intend on winning. So I appreciate you guys helping us out in this process. Thank you. Godspeed.
Thank you, Mayor. We really appreciate your leadership, as it's not only been great for the city of Newark and its small businesses, but it's also been a beacon that's given direction to mayors and small business throughout the country as we work through the uncertainties related to this pandemic. The mayor mentioned the bridge, and he talked about how programs such as the Newark Small Business Emergency Fund, as well as the Payroll Protection Program, and as well as our fair share, and the program launched by Sean Combs of Combs Enterprises, is helping small businesses navigate what's become a plethora of release programs that has not to date resulted in a great deal of money coming into our communities to help our businesses not only sustain themselves through this pandemic, but thrive. So with that, we really want to lead the way here in Newark by bringing forth, the executive that has really been at the forefront of memorializing and actualizing our fair share, which is a program that is it's absolutely committed to creating a path for MWBEs to get their share of the payroll protection program amidst an environment where money is extremely scarce, and many banks are really focused on providing these loans to their existing customers. So with that, I'd like Tariq Brooks, who is the COO of Combs Enterprise, to talk about our fair share in more detail and how it can help small businesses participate in the payroll protection program.
Thank you very much, Burnell. Very happy to be here. On behalf of Sean Combs and all the employees at Combs Enterprises, I'd like to thank the mayor and the city of Newark for having us. I think the way you are aggressively standing up for your businesses is a model that all cities should replicate. Extremely important. So thank you to everyone that is in this session. For those that don't know, Combs Enterprises is the holding company of Sean Diddy Combs, and our portfolio includes businesses in a number of different industries, including Ciroc Vodka and De Leon Tequila in the spirits industry, Aqua Hydrate in the water space, Revolt TV and Media in TV and digital content distribution. Bad Boy Records is our kind of foundation and core music label. And we also have charter schools with Capital Preparatory Charter Schools. We have one in Harlem, New York, one in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and soon to be one in the Bronx, New York. So that is our portfolio. I am responsible for overseeing that portfolio and anything we do new, which brings us to our fair share. When the stimulus package was announced on March 27th, one of the things that Sean and I talked a lot about is the legacy of our communities having limited access to capital. I'm sure many of you already know that, Black and brown entrepreneurs only get, 2% of business loans and 2% of venture capital. So there's a long legacy of our communities not being able to access the capital we need. And when you think about things like the COVID-19 pandemic, we are much more likely to get hit harder because we are less well equipped. Our businesses aren't capitalized the same way other businesses are. So we're not able to weather the storms that come the same way. And so when we saw this stimulus package coming out, we really were concerned that without intentional effort, our communities would get left behind and have to suffer alone through what we expect to be, a recession that is comparable not only to the recession in 2008 caused by the financial crisis, but the Great Depression. It is really going to be a tough battle back to a strong economy for our entire country, and our communities will suffer worse without intentional effort. And so we began talking with our colleagues, first and foremost with John Lewis at the Harbor Bank of Maryland, about how we could work together and what we could figure out. And we came up with our fair share, which is a very simple concept. We need to ensure that our businesses get our fair share of the stimulus money that's being made available. As the mayor already spoke about, when that first $349 billion went out in, I think, about 13 days, we didn't really participate in the way we should have. There were articles in the New York Times and other publications that talked about, how the money didn't trickle down. We're now hearing about more and more organizations, from the Los Angeles Lakers to Stanford University, Harvard University, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, all of these large organizations that took big chunks of that first $349 billion. What we did while that money was being released is standupourfairshare.com, which is a site that is really designed to do three things. One is to create awareness. We want to use Sean's platform to help people out there understand that, yes, they are eligible. Small business owners, independent contractors like barbers and beauticians and photographers, nonprofits like churches, very, very key institutions in our communities are all eligible for this money. The second thing we wanted to do was make sure that people understood what a successful application would look like. So if you go to ourfairshare.com, you'll see checklists, you'll see how-to videos to help you understand everything you need to make sure your application is submitted successfully. And an important piece of that is the fact that if your information is submitted properly and the funds are used for the appropriate expenses, the loan becomes forgivable. That's a very important point. You know, if you use this money according to the guidelines, you will not have to pay it back. And so that makes this kind of access to capital even more important, because the idea behind PPP was to give people a couple months of expense money to be able to help get through this toughest of times. And so if you can get that capital and use it in a way that it is forgivable, it's a real win-win for any entrepreneur out there. So the education piece is really important. And the last piece is to connect potential applicants to lenders who are still taking applications. So what happened after the first money ran out is a lot of lenders had backlogs in their organizations already, so they weren't taking any new applications. We went out and found some best-in-class lenders who are willing to still take in applications. And now that the new money is made available, as of yesterday, as the mayor mentioned, they're now submitting those applications. So we are very much encouraging people to move as quickly as they can to be able to get their applications completed accurately and then submitted to a lender who's willing to kind of submit those applications in. And again, we feel like this is critically important for our communities right now. Our communities pay taxes too, so we have just as much right to this money as any other organization. So we're encouraging our people to really work hard to get their applications in quickly. You know, given the demand and given the stress that the entire country's under, we have no doubt that this money is going to go quickly. So we don't think it's a time for folks to kind of hesitate. You really do want to get your application put together thoughtfully, get that submitted as soon as you can to give yourself the best chance of getting a capital award from the Small Business Administration. And that is our real mission right now. Longer term, we want our fair share to be a platform that minority business people that are seeking capital can go to find sources of capital. But that's a mission for once we get through the crisis. Right now, the most important message we can convey is to get an application in as soon as possible. Whether you do it through our fair share or not, get an application as soon as possible to give yourself a best chance possible of getting some of the funds to help your business to survive this pandemic and the recession that's going to follow it.
Thank you, Tariq. Two really strong takeaways. Well, actually three from what was said. Number one, we are in the midst of a massive transfer of wealth, ladies and gentlemen. And if we learn anything from the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and other recent, tragedies or pandemics of this magnitude, is that once there is, a pandemic and or tragedy, then there is a recovery period that creates opportunities for a financial windfall for someone. And what we are trying to promote here and make possible is really a pathway for minority business owners to be in line to take advantage of the opportunities that are sure to come when we get to the other side of this pandemic. The second key takeaway is that our fair share simplifies the process of getting through the application and getting to an award. And the third takeaway is it's also creating bank options for small businesses that may not have a bank and or are having difficulties working with the banks that they currently have. One of the big points that the mayor made is that so far there's only really been a 10% success rate for minority businesses that have applied for the PPP loans. So one of the things that is extremely impressive, but also extremely necessary as it relates to the plan that Sean Combs and Tariq put together, is also tying it to community banks, specifically those that are led by people of color that are ready, willing, and able to focus on this subsector of small businesses so that they will have the opportunity to get loans in the same way that everyone else does. So with that being said, I'd like for John Lewis, the Executive Director and Chief Administrative Officer of the Harbor Bank of Maryland and one of the architects of this program, to talk through his thought process as it relates to their participation, the participation of other community banks in this program.
Great. Thank you, Burnell. And I'd like to thank the mayor of Newark and the city of Newark for providing this time to talk to everyone on the phone today. It's always an honor to be working with you, Burnell, as well as with Tarek. So taking a step back, and when we talk about what this program is and what it's intended to do, and why it's really important that we have our fair share, you get to the meat of the issue here. We are in a situation where the economy has essentially been shut down, and it's been shut down not by the fault of business owners, but it's been shut down formally due to everything that's needed for us to get through this pandemic. And truthfully, in my view, I believe that this pandemic may certainly be with us for another 18 months or longer until we have a vaccine or we have some measure or normalcy brought back into the country. That being the case, we need our businesses to survive. We know that not only are our businesses the key and the lifeblood of the economy, keeping neighborhoods strong, keeping development and keeping the economy going, but the main way that people get their health insurance is through employment. And of course, during a pandemic, people need to have health insurance. So government policy was essentially created here in this instance to help employment and payroll levels be maintained. The way that they decided to do that was through the Small Business Administration's architecture to be able to fund small businesses. The Small Business Administration, of course, has been around for some time providing loans to small businesses. But as Tarek Brooks mentioned earlier, as soon as we saw the SBA being the primary mechanism for the distribution of funds, we said, we've got to get active on this. My institution spent 2 years working formally with the SBA in the Milken Institute to understand their challenges in providing loan guarantees to African Americans, Latinos, and minorities across the country. And it really boiled down to 3 factors. There is a gap in just trust between our communities and banking institutions. And banking institutions are the institutions that are intermediaries for SBA activities. There is a challenge with capital, just dollar amounts being available in the institutions that we have, the CDFIs and other things that support capital provision in our communities. And then lastly, what we know is capital absorption takes longer in our communities. That means that there needs often to be some form of technical assistance, some form of guidance or consulting to get capital to meet with the business and the opportunity. So you take all of those historical factors that we know have been challenges to providing capital into African American communities, and then you throw it into this pandemic scenario. So we all are probably well aware right now that there has been $659 billion with a B that's been formally allocated to this program. And that allocation is expense, right? So these aren't loans. In the formal budgeting that's been approved, it's expected that these loans are either going to be forgiven or that the money is going to be lost by the government. So if you do what you're supposed to do under this program, it's not expected to be repaid, right? It is expected to go back and be a loss to the government there. All that being said, we know the challenges with the architecture in the system that this was created for. All of last year, the Small Business Administration provided about $28 billion in guarantees. Again, $28 billion. The first tranche was $349 billion, and that went in about 2 weeks. So we're talking about a system that's built to do $28, $30 billion a year, doing $659 billion in less than a month. So everything that was challenging before is even more pronounced in this moment. And in this moment, it's very critical. It's very critical to our companies, it's very critical to our communities, because the intent of this stimulus is to keep businesses going, to keep providing them with revenue so they can maintain their payrolls, so people can maintain health insurance, and we can have some measure of economic safety. So in doing that, they really made a system that should work with very few kind of hiccups and challenges compared to the normal SBA 7A process. To get this loan, essentially you need to apply. It's a 2-page application. You need to have a number of supporting documents to basically support the calculation that's required of this application. And that calculation gets to 2.5 times your average trailing 12-month salary and payroll, and some other benefits and things are included in that calculation. But that is what comes out as a loan. And if you maintain the number of employees that you had at February 15th, and you spend at least 75% of that amount over the next 8 weeks on payroll, and you can spend the other 25% on mortgage insurance and utilities and a couple of other things. But if you do that over the next 8 weeks, then 8 weeks from the disbursement of the loan, then the loan is forgiven. So, you know, what we always talk about, and I'm sure you've heard the discussions because they were going on seemingly endlessly over the last few years, we hear about the wealth gap, right? We hear about the lack of liquidity in the African-American community. We hear about the historical wealth transfers that we miss. What I submit to you and what I really want our communities to understand is that we're in the middle of one of those now. When you see the federal government talking about a $2.2 trillion program that's followed by another multi-trillion-dollar program and will probably be followed by another multi-trillion-dollar program, this is not the instance for our communities and our businesses and our entrepreneurs to be standing on the sideline. I've had a number of conversations about, you know, difficulties with the applications, and what I would impress upon people is look at it like this. This is 2.5 times your average trailing 12-month salary. So to spend 4 hours on this or 8 hours on this, doing hard things, doing the things that require resourcefulness, will never have a higher payoff. It will never be more important. And it's something that we must do in this moment. So I will stop there.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the comments, the specificity, the data. You know, we can't impress upon folks more how serious this pending transfer of wealth is. And to John's point, the 4 hours that people will need to commit to this, the documentation that needs to be pulled together, it's absolutely worth it all to make sure that your name, your business is in the queue to receive your fair share as it relates to the current federal, state, and local assistance going to businesses that are trying to navigate this pandemic. To that point, we have another banking representative to give perspective. Mr. Willie Blaylock from Industrial Bank is going to talk about their approach to providing payroll protection program loans to their clientele, as well as some of the other work that they're doing to prepare their clients, both current and future, to take part in these initiatives. Sounds like we're having some technical issues with Mr. Blaylock, and we'll circle back to him. So we're going to move forward in the programming. One of the things that John mentioned was the need for technical assistance as it relates to completing the applications. One of the great things that Newarkers have benefited from, and we ask that you continue to take advantage of, is the technical assistance that's been afforded by the mayor via the Economic Development Corporation and Economic and Housing Development Department as it relates to both the Payroll Protection Program application, as well as the Small Business Emergency Fund that the mayor launched a couple of weeks ago in response to COVID-19. Here to walk you all through the Payroll Protection Program application is Invest Newark CFO, Liddell Robbins. Liddell?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. What we're going to do, and judging by some of the questions that have been posted and I replied to, is we're going to just go through step by step how we went about applying for a payroll protection program loan. Invest Newark was able to apply as a nonprofit organization, and we were recently notified that we completed a successful application. So this is meant to kind of get very much into the details about how to do this. Next slide, please. The first thing that I want you to remember are what I would call the 5 key steps. The first step, which is the most important, is about preparation. It is about collecting all of the relevant documentation and doing the initial calculation. Now, I will take you through in a little more detail later on the collect documentation and also how we went about doing an initial application. The second thing is you need to apply. As the previous presenters mentioned, there are multiple ways to apply, but we're going to focus today on applying through Our Fair Share, because as has been mentioned, one of the main problems in the first round is that many businesses, minority businesses, could not find a bank that would accept their application. And that is what Our Fair Share is meant to address. So with Our Fair Share, you're going to complete a preliminary application on their website, and then they are going to connect you with a bank who is going to help you complete your application, which will be submitted by that particular lender. And 2 of our presenters today, Harbor Bank of Maryland and Industrial Bank, are lenders that are working with Our Fair Share to complete your application, even if you do not have a pre-existing banking relationship. That is very important. This is a way to get connected with a bank that will approve or that will process your application and submit it. Can't guarantee approval because that is done by the SBA, but they will at least process your application if you do not have a pre-existing relationship. The third step is execution. When your application or when you get connected with the bank, the financial institution, you need to complete the application with them. You should follow up with whoever banking contact you're given. And if your application is successful, you need to sign the documentation that you're given to receive the loan, which could be forgivable. In our case, we applied, and over a 2-week period, I actively followed up with our bank, TD Bank, to make sure that our application was being processed. And the most important step is when your bank tells you your application has been approved and you have been given an SBA number. When you are given an SBA number, that is when you know your application has been approved by the SBA. Your bank has the green light to provide you with the funding that you apply for. That is the critical thing that you're trying to get, is an SBA number through this process. The next thing is when you get the money, as John was mentioning, you need to spend it appropriately over the next 8 weeks, and you must save your records. Your records are basically going to be your payroll, your rent, your utilities, and interest, the things that you said in your application that you were going to use the funds for. When the 8-week period is done, you will write your bank and apply for forgiveness, and they are going to ask for records showing that you spent the money that way. Next step, please. So now I'd like to reiterate what has been mentioned earlier, because some of the questions are about who is eligible. If you are a nonprofit, you are eligible. That includes, for example, a church and a faith-based entity. Invest Newark is a nonprofit. We applied, we received. Churches, nonprofits, faith-based institutions are eligible. If you are a veterans organization, if you are a sole proprietorship, if you are self-employed, if you are an independent contractor. Basically, if you are working for yourself and you have filed historically the necessary tax records to show that you work for yourself, then you are eligible to apply. I'm going to get into this more when we do the application. You must have less than 500 employees, with certain exceptions being made, and your principal residence must be in the United States. But to emphasize what has been said by all of the speakers, you should apply if you are in business, a nonprofit, including in business for yourself, a church, a faith-based institution, and you should encourage other people to apply if you know they're in this situation and they don't believe they are eligible. Next slide, please. Now, the basic documentation that you are going to be asked for, and it will vary by financial institution, is they're going to look for proof to show that you are essentially in business. And that type of documentation is basically your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet. Very important, and I will argue almost the most important, are records from your payroll company to the extent that you use a payroll company. If you are self-employed, then I will talk about a little later the documentation that you should gather. You should particularly have your payroll records for the last month. You should also ask from your payroll provider copies of your 941s, your tax filings. This is specifically if you are, a company with multiple employees. You may be asked to provide your NAICS code. You can just Google NAICS if you don't know what your code is and look it up. For some people, it is on your certificate of incorporation that you got from the state. You should be able to tell when your business was formed, and you may be asked for things like your articles of incorporation and your operating agreement. Again, this list is primarily geared towards, C Corps and S Corps, but it's generally relevant as to the type of information that you should have. Next slide, please. Now, as John mentioned, the actual application is very simple. It essentially asks for you to identify the type of company you are, including whether you are a nonprofit, self-employed, veterans organization, whatever you are that is doing business, you list that as your type of entity. And then you fill in your name, your contact details, your social security number, or your EIN. The most important number on this application is what is referred to as average monthly payroll, because that is the number that is going to determine the size of loan you're eligible for. The second most important number is the number of employees, because what makes the loan forgivable is if you essentially retain the employees that you applied for, or you immediately bring those people back to the extent that you may have let them go, and pay them with this loan. Because the objective is to get money out to individuals by way of businesses and to help businesses be able to retain their staff. You will also check what you're using the money for: payroll, lease, mortgage interest, utilities. Those are the eligible expenses. However, you should know that in order for the loan to be forgivable, and this is very important, your payroll cost must be at least 75% of the total money that you spent when you got the loan. So if you have a weird situation where you're the only employee and you don't pay yourself much, and you have a very expensive office, and your office rent is more than you actually pay yourself, then only the payroll portion of your loan could end up being forgiven. So you just need to be aware of that. Next slide. Now, I'm going to, in a few moments, show you how to actually calculate the loan amount. But there are other tools out there, such as Intuit Aid Assist, that can help you. Similarly, they'll be provided at the end of the call. Our colleagues at Audible can talk about capital consulting, where you can write them and ask for help if you still need assistance on how to do this. Next slide, please. The last part of the application is basically going to ask you information about yourself. So who owns the business? So if you're a sole proprietor, you'll put yourself. If you're a nonprofit, you will put not applicable. We are a nonprofit, so there are no owners. Same for a church or a faith-based institution. And you fill out that information on the application. Then it's going to ask you questions about, your history. You have to answer those questions truthfully, such as whether or not you have applied for an economic injury disaster loan, right? Or if you have common management. The common management one is important because I saw people asking a question saying, I have 2 different businesses. Then you're going to want to apply for those businesses, I think, on a consolidated basis, so that you don't find a situation that both applications get rejected. That is one of the areas where you might want to get guidance on. But basically, you're going to answer the questions truthfully because you will be asked to attest to the answers that you provided. Next slide, please. When all of this is said and done, I hope that everyone is successful in basically getting a PP application approved by the SBA and receiving funding. When you get that funding, what is key is that you spend the money appropriately over the next 8 weeks. And you will need to provide records of how you spent the money. Some people are even arguing that keep the PPP funding in a clean bank account and then only deduct from that bank account the funding that is associated with basically your payroll, your interest on your mortgage, and your rent and your utilities, so that it's easy to keep track of how the money was used. You also need to provide evidence that you retained the same number of people that you asked for funding for at the beginning, or you brought those individuals back, because the goal is to make sure that if we give you money to retain people and pay people, including yourself, that is what you did. You will need to show proof of things like rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and also if you paid health insurance or you made contributions to retirement. All of those things are going to go with your letter of forgiveness, basically saying, this is how I used the money, and this is why I should have my loan forgiven. Because if it is not forgiven, it is going to draw an interest rate of 1%, and you will have to pay it off in about a 2-year period. That's very cheap cost of capital, but the goal is to make sure that you actually have a forgivable loan here, because that is why this program is so attractive. Next slide, please. Then you give that with all of your documentation to the lender, and they will go through the process of basically confirming the documentation. So the lender in this case is going to be the person that you approach to apply, or in the case of Our Fair Share, the lender that they connected you with. I think, Vanessa, this is the last slide in my presentation. If you can now share my screen.
Thank you, Liddell. We really appreciate the thorough overview of the PPP loan application and process. I know there's been several questions with regard to the availability of the webinar. I just want to say, even before we get to the Q&A part of this agenda, that this programming will be available at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And we obviously are going to post that via our website and investnewark.org, but also we'll be working with some of our partners in the city, among other places, to make sure that we distribute access to this webinar as far and wide as possible. I'll let you go into your spreadsheet, and then we will move on to our friends from Audible.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the points that I made, thank you, Brunel, about the key information. So when I talked about documentation, if you are self-employed, the most important thing that you need to have is your 2019 taxes, even if it is just a version that you have prepared that you are not submitting, which essentially has your Schedule C, right? Because to be self-employed, the evidence that the SBA is going to look for and your bank is going to look for is your 2019 taxes, where you basically show how much money you made as a self-employed person. And line 31, which is the income that you made, that is what you're going to use to determine your calculation. You should also provide your 2020, records to show how this continued in 2020. When I say how it continued, I'm talking about how your business continued to proceed in 2020 around the date of February 15th. If you are a nonprofit or a company, one of the main supporting documents you're going to be asked to prove is your 941, which is basically what we submit showing how much we paid in wages and benefits on a quarterly basis. That is going to be the proof that you were a business in 2019. As I mentioned, you should also gather your latest payroll statements because your business may have changed from 2019 to 2020. Therefore, when we did our application, we submitted our 2019 941s as proof of our history, but then we also used our latest payroll statements to actually calculate how much money we should apply for. And that is why I said you have to use common sense in my remarks here. If you are a partnership, it is much more complicated, and I recommend that you work with your accountant to do this because partnership accounting is very specific and it's too complicated for us to go in here, and you likely will need some help. So now, what I have is a sample of what I've called Liddell's Test Company. So when I was applying for our organization, which let's just call is Liddell's Test Company, I went and I grabbed my payroll report. And what I did was I basically determined what salary am I paying people as of right now. And to show an example of the adjustment, and because this is a fictitious company, I decided that I wanted to pay myself $125,000. I decided I wanted to pay my colleague Tanika $115,000. I decided that my colleagues Jose, Paula, and Rick, their salaries were $85,000, $40,000, and $35,000. So my gross salaries for 2020 is $400,000. Now, when I do my PPP application, any salary that is over $100,000 gets capped. So for the purpose of my application, I had to reduce my salary and Tanika's salary to $100,000. However, Jose's, Paula's, and Rick's salaries all remain the same. So for the purposes of my PPP application, my total payroll was $360,000. Now, as I mentioned, I know that I pay Social Security, I know that I pay Medicare, and I know that I pay New Jersey state taxes, and I know that I contribute to my 403B plan. I estimate how much I pay for each of those things on an annual basis, and I basically zeroed out Social Security and Medicare because those are not eligible expenses, so you can't claim those. However, I can claim what I contribute for people's pension and 403B and healthcare. So I added those numbers. And what you see is I have a total payroll of $387,720 for the year. I divided this number by 12. That came up with my average compensation per month. I added that number to my rent, which is $1,000, my utility, which is $200, and I came up with a total of $33,510. I multiply that number by 2.5, which you'll see on the application. And as you'll see where it says average monthly payroll on the application, I basically put in 3,510. I multiplied it by 2.5 and I got $83,775. And that is the amount that I am applying for through the Our Fair Share application and subsequently with the banks that they connect me with. So I hope that was helpful in running through a calculation. The only thing that I will say is that if you are a sole proprietor, when you are calculating your income, you are going to look at your Schedule C, line 31, and that is going to be your number. Thank you all very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to the host.
Thank you, Liddell. We really appreciate that. One of the things that we have been really serious about in this process, not just making vendors and or providers of application services, but also, you know, in the vein of the mayor's approach of being hands-on as it relates to giving folks hands up, we have created a partnership with Audible.com as well as Newark Venture Partners to provide hands-on technical assistance via virtual consulting opportunities. And from that, I want to have Brian Quinn, who is the Director of U.S. Policy for Audible, to talk about the technical assistance that we have been providing and continue to provide via our partnership with Audible and Newark Venture Partners. Brian?
Thank you, Burnell and the Invest North team for moving quickly to put together this important webinar and convening these critical stakeholders from Our Fair Share to share what they're doing and how they're contributing to facilitating access to capital. Audible is proud to be joining a partnership with NVP, Newark Venture Partners, and Invest North to mobilize a pool of employee volunteers including attorneys, finance experts, investors, entrepreneurs, and other individuals from our businesses that are going to advise Newark small businesses with a specific focus on how to navigate the reductions in revenue during this crisis and the numerous overlapping government funds that are available. So we quickly launched the Capital Consulting Initiative, and you see the email on your screen, capitalconsulting@investnorth.org, which will go to our teams, and we will work to schedule a virtual consultation call to learn more about your business and share some information and resources to help you navigate the crisis. I just want to, before I end, commend the work of Invest North to quickly operationalize this mentoring program and put together webinars and information resources on their website. So thank you, Bernal.
Thank you, Brian. This marks the end of our agenda. Before we open it up for some Q&A, I want to again, first and foremost, thank you all for joining us. I know that in this time of uncertainty, with so much information going from the government, the media, and others, it's a little tough to navigate. So we just thank you for taking out the time to listen to this webinar. We hope it's been helpful and informative to you all. From there, I really want to thank Mayor Razjay BARAKA for his leadership in providing not just programming and funds, but also, as Brian said, convening partners from far and wide to make sure Newark businesses get the best opportunity possible to not just survive this pandemic, but to thrive coming out of this pandemic. I want to thank Combs Enterprises, specifically Tara Brooks, the COO of Combs Enterprises, for quickly acting to put together a program such as Our Fair Share that not only simplified the application process, but also gave small businesses options as it relates to banks. I definitely want to thank our banking partners, John Lewis, Willie Blaylock from Industrial Bank, among the other members of the banking coalition that are working with Our Fair Share to make sure that small businesses have the same sort of access to capital as their larger business partners. And then I I would be remiss if I didn't thank our partners at Audible and Newark Venture Partners for doing extremely hard work as it relates to providing technical assistance via these virtual consulting meetings that we are having, where questions like many of those that have been asked in the chat are answered in real time. And for those questions that we can't answer, we make sure that we're responsive in sending out answers to those questions at a later date. As Brian mentioned, if you want an appointment to get a virtual consultant, please do so via capitalconsultant@investnewark.org. And I just want to close by saying that we encourage all businesses to act now. This program, as well as the emergency disaster program, are scarce resources, but they are important resources that are going to allow small businesses, every business from banking to barbershops, to have an opportunity to get the type of payroll boost that allow you to really plan and adjust accordingly as it relates to the new world that we're all stepping into. So in short, before we pivot and talk about Newark Small Business Emergency Grant, I just want to encourage everyone that you do have options regardless of what is going on as it relates to the trial and error that MWB businesses have had trying to access these funds during the first tranche. You have options, whether it's our fair share or another community bank. I also want to emphasize that you do not have time. Those funds are for the second tranche. Although it was $310 billion allocated for the payroll protection program, the expectation from all experts is those funds will have been claimed by Thursday, if not sooner. The last thing is you are not alone. The mayor, our partners have taken great steps to provide both technical assistance as well as funds for you to navigate this pandemic. Specifically here in Newark, the mayor created a small business emergency grant fund in partnership with the United Way. The application can be assessed via the United Way of Greater Newark's website. You can submit your follow-on documentation as it relates to your business license, tax return, and the like to sbap@uwnewark.org. And we have also created frequently asked questions and English and Spanish via our website and investnewark.org. And there's a specific COVID-19 tab. The deadline to apply for the Small Business Emergency Grant Fund is April 30th. But we asked, just in the same vein as we've asked as it relates to the payroll protection program, that you act now. Funds are limited. There is great demand. So please, as it was mentioned earlier, set aside the time, pull together the information, the documentation, and get it in so that you can be counted in the queue. If you have any questions or issues working through the documentation, again, please email us at capitalconsultant@investnewark.org to schedule a virtual appointment to walk through that process for both programs. With that, we'll open it up for a few questions for our panelists, and then from there, we will close out. One of the questions here is that, will funding be available for house of worship or faith-based organization? The answer is yes. They are considered nonprofits, and there is funding available as part of the program for nonprofits. Another question is, where can I find the SBA PPP application form? Obviously, you can obtain that form on the SBA's website, but as was mentioned in the program, you can also get that information from your local bank or through ourfairshare.com.
So should we just read and answer some of the question and answers while we're online?
Sure.
Okay, I saw, how about a business that did not generate a profit during 2019? That is not really relevant. What is relevant is that you actually had payroll. So you will provide your payroll data that I mentioned, which is your Form 941, to basically show that you actually paid people in the past. And hopefully you will also have payroll data in 2020, which you will use to basically form the basis of your application. Then, how does the percentage of ownership apply to churches? As I mentioned, if you are a nonprofit or a church, in that part of the application, you would put not applicable, I am a nonprofit or I'm a church. I also saw a question about if you include utility costs in your loan request calculation, was that incorrect? No, you are entitled to ask for utility, rent, and interest costs on your loan. However, the key is if you want your loan to be forgivable, those costs cannot be more than your, those costs cannot be more than 25% of the total amount that you requested. Because for the loan to be forgivable, over 75% must be used for payroll and payroll related costs. And you should also in your application check that you apply for payroll, rent, and utilities as what you're going to use the funds for. I can pause and allow some of the other presenters to answer questions, as I think we have Willie back as an example.
Yes, I'm here.
Willie, I'm gonna yield the floor to the question was whether or not the Newark Small Business Emergency Fund proceeds were only available for Newark businesses. The answer is yes. However, the payroll protection program is available to all businesses.
Willie, there was a question about, do we have any insights as to when the second round of funding might run out and flexibility of banks with accepting documents? Could you answer that one?
There is no particular time when the funds are going to run out. However, you have to take under consideration all banks are actually in the SBA system and processing these loans. So as they're processed, the chunk of funds is reduced dramatically. So you can only imagine there's about 5,000 banks. So you can just imagine how many applications are actually being processed. So many that the website was actually having some problems yesterday. What you can do though, and banks have been taking applications, is as you apply to your bank, regardless of if funds are available or not, if your bank is still accepting applications, you still need to submit your application because, as Burnell said, as the next round of funds become available, and also John mentioned this as well, at least you will be in the actual queue so that your application can be reviewed and queued up so that if and when new funds become available, you're automatically there in that next round. And that's what actually happened when the first round of funds ran out very quickly.
Thank you, Willie. I see another good question that, Willie, you might be able to opine on. The 8-week window of using the money for payroll, when does that 8 weeks begin? For example, if the money lands in my account on May 1st, am I to start the payroll that day, or do I have until July 1st to start using the payroll money? Can you talk about how the 8 weeks applies?
The 8 weeks is actually the amount of money that you're actually given for the actual employees themselves. So yes, there is a period of time. You have to hire the employees back by a certain period of time to start using those funds. What I can tell you is, and it was mentioned earlier, that documentation and record keeping is the key to this entire process, especially if you're looking to have these funds forgiven. You need to document every single dollar that you actually use towards these employees, to getting them back and retaining them.
Okay. There was a question about, are nonprofits with less than 10 employees eligible? The answer to that one is yes. And there was also a question about, am I able to submit my 2018 tax return along with my 2019 payroll run, as I have not filed my 2019 taxes? For the case of Invest Newark, that is what we did, and our application was accepted. I think based on the guidance, if you are a sole proprietor, you should at least have a draft of your 2019 taxes. Even if you have not filed it, you should use it with your application, because for sole proprietors, your 2019 tax statement, particularly your Schedule C, was listed as one of the required documents by the SBA. But banks, I guess, do have some level of discretion, around that. I don't know, John and Willie, if either of you want to opine on that a little more.
Yeah, so let me just talk at a high level, because it's important for people to understand. So this is a program that came out of the U.S. Treasury. The Treasury, of course, oversees the IRS, right? What they are trying to get to in the spirit of this is that real payrolls that can be documented. So they give leeway all the way to being able to use bank statements. Now, obviously, that's going to take a much longer time in a bank that's really invested in going through those things. But what you don't want to be playing around with is this has to be funds that have been established, that taxes have been paid on, that there's clarity and record keeping to it, and it has to be defensible what's claimed there. And that's the spirit of it. So, if you take that as a spirit and you're able to be aligned with that, then you can make a compelling conversation with the lender around how you've arrived at that documentation, even if it's a little bit different than some of the things that they firmly ask for.
Okay. What if you cannot spend the PP funds in 8 weeks because it is not safe to open the facility? What is your advice, John or Willie?
Yeah, again,
John, do you want to
so sure. So it's challenging. So what we've been telling applicants, right, is there are certainly scenarios where you want to apply for less than you're qualified for. That's one of the governors. If you take more money than you can show as qualified expenses, then it doesn't become forgiven. You've essentially applied for a loan. And that's not the objective here. So understand, one, what you're eligible for, but also understand what you are going to be able to get forgiven on the other side of it. And that really is the number that you should be applying for.
All right, thank you. I'm just scrolling through the questions and I'll read them out. A few of the team members able to answer questions, including myself, are going to be able to stay until 5:30. So we'll try to handle as many of these, but I recognize that some of our presenters don't have that much time. So anyone that needs to, to leave, we'll shut this down. Feel free to exit. Otherwise, you can send questions to Capital Consulting if we don't get to, all of them. There's a question about, will OurFairShare.com work with women-owned businesses as a minority group, or is their service only for business owners of color?
So we just want to be very clear. Our Fair Share is for everyone. Anyone with a small business that's qualified and eligible can go to Our Fair Share and use it. We want folks from urban communities, we want folks from rural communities to use it. What we see, though, is a special need to make sure that there's something available, particularly for communities that missed this first stimulus package. But there should be no confusion that Our Fair Share is available to everyone. And we hope everyone that can use it and that it's helpful for does take the opportunity to use it.
All right. Thank you, John.
Okay. Again, I want to thank everyone that joined us today. I want to give special thanks to all the panelists. And I also want to reemphasize that this webinar will be available tomorrow morning after 9 a.m. We again encourage everyone to act quickly as it relates to filling out an application for the payroll protection program. Again, want to emphasize that technical assistance is available at capitalconsulting@investnewark.org. And with that, we will close and thank you all again for joining, and good luck with it all. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.